The letters were getting sent to the wrong address.
That's what one angry neighbour said after a 66-year-old woman was evicted from the flat she had lived in for nearly 4 decades.
They've changed her locks. I've had to take her in. She's had to put her 4 cats up for adoption.
The neighbour says residents were left shocked by what happened inside this block of flats in Bracknell. A pensioner, evicted after 37 years, and now homeless during one of the worst housing shortages in decades. And the tenant says she had lived in the 2-bedroom flat since raising her daughters there years ago. But after falling into rent arrears, the situation eventually escalated to eviction. And cases like this raise difficult questions for both landlords and tenants in the post-Section 21 era, because by the time a rent arrears case reaches this stage, the process behind the scenes may already have been going on for months, sometimes years. The landlord involved is a registered social housing provider operating within the regulated housing sector. And organisations like these are expected to operate formal arrears and tenancy sustainment procedures long before possession action ever reaches the final stages. That normally means early intervention, income officers, telephone calls, letters, home visits, payment arrangements, affordability assessments, referrals to welfare support teams, debt advice services and specialist agencies. And in cases involving vulnerability, landlords are also expected to consider what additional support may be needed to help sustain the tenancy. But this is the part many people never see. Every missed appointment, every failed payment arrangement, every unanswered phone call, every warning letter, every welfare referral, every repayment discussion, every attempt to prevent the arrears escalating. In cases like this, landlords must provide evidence showing they acted reasonably and proportionately. And before social landlords can proceed fully through the courts, mandatory pre-action requirements need to be followed properly. If a judge believes reasonable steps were not taken before legal action began, cases can sometimes be delayed, adjourned, or challenged procedurally. The landlord involved says eviction is only considered where they have been unable to resolve matters in any other way. The provider said, "Keeping people safely housed is at the heart of what we do," and added, "Eviction is never taken lightly and is only considered where we have been unable to resolve matters in any other way."
But neighbours say the tenant believed part of the rent was already being covered. She was working under the impression that part of it gets paid, and she can prove that with letters.
Now, the full benefit history in this case has not been detailed. The tenancy records are confidential. We are unable to verify the evidence provided in court documents. Details surrounding how the arrears eventually reached the reported figure of around £10,000 remain unclear, but there are signs within the circumstances being described. The tenant had remained in a 2-bedroom property after her daughters had grown up and left home. For working-age social housing tenants, under-occupation rules, commonly known as the bedroom tax, can reduce housing support entitlement where a household is considered to have a spare bedroom. This can leave tenants struggling to pay the shortfall of rent not being covered by benefits. A 1-bedroom under-occupation reduction is normally 14% of the weekly rent. Pension-age tenants are generally exempt from those rules, but cases like this often develop over extended periods of time, and it is unclear at what point the arrears first began accumulating. The neighbour also claimed the rent increased from around £700 to £1,200. But again, we do not know over what time frame those increases took place, or the exact tenancy details behind them. There are also support mechanisms that can sometimes be explored where housing costs become unaffordable. Previously known as discretionary housing payments, and from the 1st of April 2026, a housing payment, part of the new Crisis Resilience Fund, designed to help prevent homelessness and sustain vulnerable households. But again, we cannot verify from the public reporting which interventions may or may not have taken place here. What we do know is that eventually the arrears appear to have reached the stage where legal enforcement action followed. and that process itself is often misunderstood by the public. Evictions do not usually happen immediately after somebody misses rent payments. Normally, once the arrears recovery process reaches a certain stage, a Section 8 notice may be served. If repayment arrangements fail or arrears continue increasing, an application can then be made to the county court. In many social housing arrears cases, discretionary grounds 10 when rent is lawfully due and ground 11 linked to persistent arrears are commonly relied upon. And even when a court order is granted, the most common outcome is often not an outright possession order. This is when the tenant is given a date to leave the property. Instead, courts frequently grant suspended possession orders. That means the tenant remains in the property on conditions that they pay the ongoing rent plus an agreed amount towards the arrears. And this next part is important. Even where somebody later defaults on that arrangement, and the landlord applies for a warrant to evict, tenants can still apply back to the court for emergency hearings requesting more time. Judges can suspend warrants. New repayment arrangements can be made. Additional terms can sometimes be imposed. So by the time a rent arrears case like this finally reaches enforcement stage, there may already have been a very long legal and procedural history behind it. It is unclear whether that happened in this particular case, but given the reported level of arrears, it is unlikely this situation developed overnight. And this is exactly why the abolition of Section 21 is creating nervousness across parts of the private rented sector. Because smaller landlords who previously relied on Section 21, no-fault possession processes, may increasingly find themselves navigating complex evidence-based arrears cases involving affordability pressures, vulnerability issues, benefit complications, and prolonged court timelines. For social landlords, those systems already exist internally. Income management teams, support pathways, arrears escalation procedures, recorded interventions. But for many private landlords, this territory may feel increasingly unfamiliar. Meanwhile, the human reality remains stark. A woman in her 60s, evicted from the home where she raised her children, her belongings outside, her cats gone, and now trying to navigate homelessness support, while the housing system itself remains under severe strain. Cases like this sit at the intersection of affordability, welfare policy, aging tenancies, housing shortages, and possession law. And as the rental system moves further into a post-Section 21 era, these are the kinds of difficult cases likely to become increasingly visible. For tenants, the message is clear. Seek advice early. Engage with landlords, housing officers, and support services as early as possible before arrears begin escalating beyond control. But landlords also face a changing landscape, with Section 8 now being the primary route for possession. Cases involving affordability pressures, vulnerability, benefit complications, and prolonged court processes require preparation, evidence, clear procedures, and early intervention long before matters ever reach enforcement stage. And for many smaller private landlords, these are challenges traditionally more associated with the social housing sector. Because once arrears cases reach the final stages of court enforcement, the financial, operational, and human costs can become significant for everyone involved.